I was staring straight down at the runway, and all I could think of was I was setting myself up to ungraciously dismantle this perfectly good little airplane, and then off in the distance I heard a voice. I think it was that of my flight instructor saying, "You can always go around."
And that's the Go Around song. And today we'll talk with the man behind the song, singing pilot Ken Dravis. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation, with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Truscott, the author of several books on the Garmin G1000, 3000, 5000, and Perspective Glass cockpits, and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. Today, corporate pilot Ken Dravis tells us a number of stories about his flying career, his music, his recording studio, and about the celebrity who was an inspiration for Ken's music and led him to become a pilot. And so that you don't miss next week's episode in whatever app you're listening to us now, take a moment right now and touch the subscribe or the follow key so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. Last week in episode 258, we talked with Arturo Guerra, who survived a VFR into IMC crash in a Carbon Cub. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/258. And this is a listener-supported show, and we're still ad-free. So if you enjoy this episode and you get some entertainment value from it, please do one of the following things. First, go out to kendravis.com and support Ken by buying some of his music. And then to support this show, Aviation News Talk, sign up to become a member and join the club. Just go out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And when you do, I'll read your name on the show. And of course, I've included both of those links in our show notes. And now let me tell you a little about Ken Dravis. Ken is a professional pilot, and he's also an accomplished songwriter, musician, and vocalist with 10 albums released to date. He's also a recording studio engineer, educator, music producer, and he's written a book about his 270 days on the Appalachian Trail. And now here's our conversation with Ken Dravis. Ken, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Max. Great to be with you.
Well, I wanted to ask about your inspiration for the Go Around song, but first, let's listen to a portion of that song.
Well, there I was that one fine Sunday afternoon, just me and my airplane in a little airport we'd never been to before. We were on short final and nothing was looking right. I was seeing red over red and white over white. I couldn't seem to remember how that saying went anyway, but I was staring straight down at the runway, and all I could think of was I was setting myself up to ungraciously dismantle this perfectly good little airplane, and then off in the distance I heard a voice. I think it was that of my flight instructor saying, "You can always go around." You can always go around if it don't look right coming down. Sliding on the ground, you can always go around. I know back when I learned to fly, my instructor was yelling in my ear, how we're in carpet cold, climb out and pitch, flaps to go, take it round the patch one more time again. But I know now, he was showing me that just because the nose is pointing down, if it doesn't look right, give it one more try. You can always go around. You can always go around. If it don't look right coming down, don't wait until you're silent, baby, sliding upside down. You can always go around.
Well, I love that. And later it says, would sure be nice to fly this plane again with the wings still straight. I love that. So tell me, what inspired you to write the song?
It ain't no place to hesitate. Well, first of all, with aviation music, I was writing songs a number of years before I started flying. And when I started flying, I was wondering if I could find a way to combine the two. And I didn't have enough experience at the time of that thought. But I held on to the idea of writing music about flying for a number of years until I gained more experience and actually had something to write about. And go around, as we all know, is something that we're taught to do, and and it's, at times a really important thing to do. So, I wanted it to be tongue-in-cheek, but still get a good message out there. And it seems like the song, for some reason, has really gotten some legs along the way. And I have to tell you, when we were in the studio recording this, it was pretty straight, and it felt boring. And the guy, good friend of mine, Lane Gibson, I told him, I said, I just want to stretch with this. He said, what do you mean? I said, I want to bring in the church choir. He's like, what? I said, yeah. So really, in the vocal booth, I just started, there I was one Sunday afternoon, and we just started laughing. I'm like, dude, that's what it has to be. So I kind of rewrote it, and I did bring in 6 members of the church choir and stacked their tracks, which mean we doubled and tripled tracks, and that's kind of where this song came from.
That's wild. And had you already become a pilot at that point in time?
Yes. So that song was recorded about in 1993, 94, and I started flying in 84.
Well, in the song, you talk about hearing your flight instructor in your head. Does that happen for you? Do you sometimes hear past CFIs in your head?
I had a couple of pretty good CFIs, but that's probably more of a reflection of how I was as a flight instructor.
Well, tell us about your flight instructor days. How long did you do that, and what did you do?
Well, my logbook shows that, and it's accurate, that I've given about 3,200 hours of instruction. So I was a very busy flight instructor. I'll tell you, I got my private very quickly, and it wasn't that I was an exceptional student, but my circumstances at the time were perfect to learn to fly. I was in western Colorado, where the weather's great, basically high desert and Grand Junction. I was playing music every night, so I had my days free. So, and money was not an issue at that time, so I went to the airport, and I went through a Cessna learning center, and I studied all day, and then I played music at night, and I got my license in 10 weeks. I wound up buying an airplane, a Skyhawk, when I had 10 hours, and, I was just totally into it. And then I remember a little bit of a letdown after I got my license, like, well, that was a lot of fun. Now what? So then I just kept flying and learning, and I enjoyed it so much. I went on, got commercial, multi, I forget, the routine, but I got all of that. And I wound up moving to Scottsdale and Phoenix, and in Scottsdale, the weather's even better, and there was plenty of money for people to learn to fly, and I was a very busy flight instructor, and that was in 85 and 86.
And tell us about how you got the initial inspiration to fly. I'm guessing this was when you were a kid. What kind of got the bug for you?
Well, both my dad and stepfather were both private pilots, but honestly, I don't remember any of that of those days. I think I must have been too young, but Dad would talk about flying sometimes, and it was intriguing, but I wound up working in Aspen a number of years later, and we can get into that, but there was a gentleman that I came to know and respect, and he told me that he was flying to L.A. and he'd be back in a few hours, and about 45 minutes later I watched his Learjet depart Aspen and bank to a 270 heading on the departure and head off to L.A., and I thought, I think I'd like to do that. And that was really the beginning for me.
That's great. So did you envision that you would have flying as your main career, or were you kind of thinking about music as well? Were you looking at parallel tracks? How did that happen?
I wasn't thinking about flying for a living at all. It just looked like fun. So, I went to Phoenix, as I mentioned, to be a flight instructor. And Western Colorado went through what was called the oil shale bust. And during that, it was a very depressed time. So financially, people left the valley for work. And I knew how to fly, and I continued my training and became a flight instructor. I moved back to Colorado to run a flight school, but there was still no money there. And so I thought I'd run a flight school and play music, but no one was hiring. And I needed to work, like most of us, so I filled out some applications and sent my resumes off, and was hired by Continental Express. So I went and flew Brazilias for a couple of years. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. So tell us about the rest of the piloting jobs that you've had since you were a flight instructor and since you flew with Continental Express.
Yeah, flight instructor for a few years, Continental Express for a couple of years. Found myself in Vermont, and I flew freight for a while, and that's actually where a couple of songs came from. There's nothing like flying Barons and Navajos in snowstorms and in ice, and the ice isn't intentional, but it's there sometimes, and ATC, really at no fault of their own, they wound up routing me through a thunderstorm, and one of my songs came from that. I mean, when you're in an airplane and you hear the crack, you know you're pretty close. So it's not where I wanted to go, but they had a radar outage, and that was the only direction they could send me, and it wasn't good. But I got a good song out of it. Other than that...
I'm guessing that's don't take chances?
Yeah, don't take chances.
Is that kind of a philosophy for you in flying?
I think flying is a risk, but you really need to weigh the risks, really know what you're doing, and if you don't, you need to back off on, let's just say if you're not feeling well, or if the weather looks like it's beyond your abilities, get homeitis, and I say that in a song, get homeitis can kill you. And it's happened a time and time and time and time again. So my philosophy, if there's something inside of you, that little voice that says, I'm not so sure about this, that's the time to pull the plug. After, in Vermont, I wound up flying for a great company as a corporate pilot in a 421, flying up and down the East Coast, single pilot, VMC, IMC. It was a great experience. There was no pressure. It was a great learning period. The business model of the company changed, and they wound up selling the airplane. And I went to work for flight safety in Wichita in the caravan program. And that was another great flying experience. I loved teaching there. I was a client at that facility from the 421 for 7.5 years. And we were under an annual contract, so I was there 3 times a year. Didn't have to. The company was big on safety, and on my downtime, they just say, hey, go off to flight safety, and, you can't be overtrained. So, you can't have too much experience. So I loved it there, and worked with some great people, helped put a video together with flight safety and the FAA to teach about CRM and ICE in the caravan. And it was just a wonderful learning experience and great time. I heard about Netjets, and for family reasons, I needed to leave the Wichita area and be closer to my 2 daughters that were very young at the time, and I couldn't stay with flight safety, but Netjets had a base near where I was going to be living. So I flew for Netjets. I started there at the beginning of 2000 and was there for about 15 years as a captain in the Citation Ultra, the Encore, Encore Plus, and a Citation 10. That's most of my flying career. I took about a 6 or 7 year hiatus and did some other life things and hiked the Appalachian Trail and wrote a book and did some more CD albums. And a friend of mine was a contract pilot, and he lives kind of in the area, and he told me that if I'd like to get into the game, let him know. And so I've, for the last year, been flying Citation 5s as a contract pilot here out at West Virginia.
Talk a little bit about Netjets flying. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of them, might be curious about that as a career. What are some of the pros and cons for that kind of flying job?
It was one of the best opportunities. I don't want to call it a job, but it was one of the best opportunities in my life. Everybody there, pilots, managers, all the way up the chain, everyone was really, really outstanding. What a great opportunity. You're flying great equipment, well maintained, everyone's respectful, well paid, great benefits, on, and they treat you extremely well. And I'm not talking financially. There were a couple times my best friend died while I was on the road, and without question one, they said, "You need to go home." And that's how they treated everybody there. Family, and take care of your personal affairs. Come to work with a clear head and do a good job, and we'll treat you well. I can't say enough good things about Netjets. They will work you hard. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but don't expect to be sitting around hotels. If I was on the 7-7 schedule most of my career, and I like that because my 7 days off, what I understand, unlike the airlines, you're off. They will not call you on a day off. Hey, can you come in? Not at all. Anyway, so they'll work you hard. The level of respect, the level of competency, everybody flies as a team, and I loved it. I don't really have anything negative to say. You're going to work hard, I'll say that. I remember when I was hired, the chief pilot for the program came in. Before he introduced himself, he walked in the room, left the back door open, and said, "Gentlemen, if you need to know where you're going to be next Tuesday at 6 p.m., this would be a good time for you to leave." And he was completely on the money.
That's funny. No, that's great. Sounds like you had a good experience with him. So tell us about this gentleman in Colorado who took off in the Learjet and your experiences with him.
Well, I need to back up just a little bit. My dad was really a jack of all trades, and one of those was he played guitar. And at about 7 years old, he started teaching me guitar, and we played together, at home on weekends and whatnot. Well, I was searching for music when I got a little older, a style that would fit me. And on the radio when I was 16, I heard John Denver's Annie song, and I liked the song. I'm a kid from the kind of the hills of New Jersey, away from the city, but out in the country in New Jersey, back in the 70s. So I went to a record store and I bought a John Denver record, and the best I could, I learned to play all these songs, and I really liked the style. I liked what the songs were about. Of course, Rocky Mountain High came out, and I thought, I need to go out to Colorado and check it out. So at 17, just before my senior year of high school, I drove out to Colorado with a friend of mine, and we looked around the state for about 2 weeks, I think, and I went home and promptly gave my folks a year's notice. Said, "Mom and Dad, thanks for the food, no hard feelings, but next year I'm out of here." So I moved to Colorado as soon as I turned 18 and graduated high school. Packed up my motorcycle and my guitar and my van, and I headed west for the Rockies. I was in Colorado Springs, and I wanted to be further in the mountains, and I moved up to Glenwood Springs, and I was a rock crusher operator, but I had also had a resume in, a job application in at the local coal mine. And the most money you could make in the valley was at the coal mines, so that's what I figured I would do. And my rock crusher broke, and the foreman said, "Hey, can you drive a dump truck? They're building a road up in Starwood and Aspen, and we need to get some gravel up there." And I was 19. I'm like, 19, I can do anything. Sure, I can drive a dump truck. Never been in one, but sure, I can do it. Well, you have to go through security to get into Starwood. And when he said Starwood and Aspen, my ears kind of perked up because I knew that was a John Denver song, Starwood and Aspen. That's where he lives. So the head of security worked days, and he would stop me as I was going in each time. What's my business? Where am I going? Etc. How long I'd be there. So I'm just dropping off some gravel. Well, he recognized me, and he would just wave me through, and I began to stop each time. His name was Roy Griffith, and we just became friends. I enjoyed his company. I never asked about John, nothing. Well, about that time, it was a short job dropping off stone, but I got to know the head of security. I got hired with the coal mines. And once in a while, I would go up and visit Roy, maybe on a Sunday, and have a cup of coffee with him, and we just became pals. I think he was kind of intrigued and frightened about being underground, and he'd ask me a lot of questions, and it was just a great time. Colorado in the 70s, and the mountains in the sunshine, and here's a good old cowboy buddy for a guy from New Jersey. So one day he said, we're going to need some help up here. Would you be interested in working up here? And I said, yeah, I would, because the coal mine job for me had just ended. There was a bad accident underground. I was driving the train, and I had to bail off the train underground. Fortunately, nobody got hurt, but it was enough to scare me into some common sense and knowing that my coal mining days were over after 6 months. Anyway, John Denver came in that morning. He and his wife drove into the area where the guard shack was, and I was introduced to John Denver. And John was the gentleman that really inspired me to learn to fly, and a lot of other things, actually.
Well, tell us more about your interactions with John.
Well, during that time, in the 70s especially, John was a superstar. He was traveling the world. Concerts are sold out. He was doing television and hosting The Tonight Show occasionally, and doing movies and new records. And he was on the go all the time. And it was a very exciting, great time. I worked for John for 2 years, and then asked him if I could sit and talk with him. And he said, well, sure, come up to the house. So we were sitting in his backyard. And he said, what'd you want to see me about? And I pulled out a cassette tape out of my pocket. And he looked at it and said, well, what's this? I said, well, it's some songs I've been writing and songs I've been working on. And he said, you write, you play, you sing, what do you do? And I said, yeah, kind of all that. And he said, well, you've been here 2 years. I didn't know that. I said, yeah, I know. I was hired to keep people like me away from you. And over that, he did have a good laugh. And he listened to it the next day, as he said he would. And we had a lengthy talk about career and music. And he was incredibly, I felt, honest and gracious and helpful. He said, you can work here as long as you want, as far as I'm concerned. But if this is what you want to do, I'd suggest you go out and do it. Anytime you write something you want me to hear, bring it to me, send it to me, call me. He totally left the door open. And I could go on about, other times that I saw John and our interaction. And it was just a really great time. And he was a great guy. I admired him a lot. And he influenced my life a lot, and probably always will.
Well, sounds like he was a big influence on your music life. Did he also have any influence on your flying life?
Well, it was because of John. He's the one that I saw blast off out of Aspen and head to L.A. So we never talked flying, but it was really because of John that got me in the cockpit.
So tell us about having met wing walker Jessie Woods and the song that you wrote about her.
Well, with my aviation music, I started with one album to see if it would even, excuse the pun, see if it would fly. And when I found out that, there was a market, I went in the studio and did a couple of more albums. Well, during those early days, which are the early 90s into about 95, I was traveling a fair amount. And there was a gentleman that, his name is Steve Soper, and Steve asked me if he could use some of my music for his aerobatic routine. And he was going to be in Las Vegas, and I was going to be there for a show. Well, we met up one day while we were setting up the convention center, setting up our booths and stuff. I was there to sell my music. And Steve said, hey, there's somebody here you just have to meet. I said, okay. So Steve's in a wheelchair, so he wheels over. Now, you got to picture this. the conference, the convention center isn't open. There's boxes everywhere. There's curtains on the floor. There's tables. There's UPS's dropped off boxes. It's a mess. It's a day or two before the show starts, and exhibitors are coming in. Well, Steve introduces me to this lady, and I'm 32 and she's probably 82, and I'm thinking, who is this old lady? And she looks at me, and she had a beautiful smile and these bright eyes, and she looked at me. Max, she said, "You're a good-looking guy. Let's dance." And she just grabbed me, and we start dancing. And first of all, I don't dance with anybody. But here we are, and I'm thinking, who is this crazy old lady? So I knew her name was Jessie, and I said, "Jessie, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your life." Well, she started telling me a story, Max, that after a few minutes, I said, "Jessie, I have to stop dancing." And I grabbed a pad, and I started taking some notes. And she told me the story of her life back in 1925 to begin with, I believe. She was like 14 years old in western Kansas, and she's at a barn dance. And she said this debonair pilot comes in, whose name was Jimmy Woods. And she said, I didn't think about anything else than the whole next year except that guy, Jimmy Woods. So the next year, 1926 or 1928, folks, I don't recall right now. But she asked her parents if she could go back to the barn dance, and her dad said, yeah, as long as that no good Jimmy Woods isn't going to be there. She said, oh, I don't think he'll be there. She knew darn well he'd be there. So she went up and said, Mr. Woods, could I dance with you or whatever it was? And he says, I haven't thought about anybody else except you for this whole year. It's probably a typical pilot line, right? So Jimmy said he's taken off the next day. He was part of the Flying Aces Circus, the Flying Aces show. And he said, if you'd like to go, we're leaving in the morning. So she went home from the dance, said goodnight, went up to her room, she told me, packed her violin, a nightgown, and a toothbrush, and crawled out the window and took off. And she took off with this group of bandits, these Flying Aces, and wound up marrying Jimmy Woods. And one day, it was constantly, it sounded like day after day, just barely getting by. And they had stopped at a field. They would fly over the town and land in a field and wait for people to show up, and they'd pay $1 for a ride. And they were just barely making it, and someone said, man, if we could only find a way to attract more people. And they've got their heads down, scratching their heads and kicking the dirt. And someone says, yeah, if we could just get someone to walk on the wing. And she looked up and everybody was looking at her. First it was, oh no. But to make a long story longer, she actually wound up, she was one of the very first wing walkers, female wing walkers. And she went on to tell me the story of her life and the sound of the wind through the wires on the biplanes. It would make the wires sing. There she goes, Jessie on the wing.
And I read that she actually fell off one time, and it was one of the few times she was wearing a parachute. That's pretty remarkable.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it shows up on the story online. I'll include a link to the show notes for people who want to read about her. Let's go ahead and listen to that song for a moment.
Okay.
I could see the memories through her eyes. Long ago, the man she loved, stories of her life. And as she spoke, I watched her drift away to the memories as warm as yesterday. And Jessie smiled and said that winter was cold. 1928 in Kansas, where she met her beau. She broke her daddy's heart, didn't say goodbye. The night that she flew off with Jimmy into the sky. They flew around this country, not a nickel to their name. Above the town to form a crowd for food and shelter from the rain. $1 for a ride to buy some gas, and on their way she winked at me and said those were the days. And the rushing wind would make the wire sing. There she goes, Jessie on the wing.
Well, that's a great song, and I could see how having met her really was the inspiration. Is that typically how you get inspired? Is there some event that leads you to write a particular song?
Sometimes it's a mood I will find myself in, whatever that mood may be, and it leads to a feeling for a song, and it leads me, just that, just a feeling, a tempo. I don't need to write with an instrument. In fact, sometimes it's distracting. I also don't like to write with a computer. I like to write with a pad and a pen or pencil, because if you write a line out as a songwriter, there's a reason probably that you wrote that line, either for a direction in your thought, or maybe it was going to fit with something else later. With a computer, you tend to just delete, and with a piece of paper, I can scratch it out, but it's still there that I can read through the scratch and maybe use that later. So when I'm writing, I really don't need not always a true situation to write about. It can be more of a thought about something instead of actually something I've experienced. That might be just something I'm thinking about.
And what led you to write Kitty Hawk?
Kitty Hawk is a song that actually means a lot to me, and the reason for that is it has to do with Max, I think people tend to take things for granted without realizing perhaps what it was that made something possible, such as an electric light bulb. We all turn a switch on, the light works, but think about the dream and the effort and the trials and the failures to get to that point. And just imagine the amazement from the inventor the first time that it worked for more than 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. It's like, man, I'm getting closer. So with that in mind, the same as the Wright brothers and Kitty Hawk, there'd been a lot of people trying it, and they were trying it, and they almost had it, and it's getting closer and getting closer, and here we are, airborne. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20, 30, we're flying. And it wasn't really all that long ago. Look at the length of history and how far we've come in such a very short time. So Kitty Hawk came from me walking through a large airport and looking out the windows of 747s, 777s, etc., and looking at the hundreds and hundreds of people wandering these terminals. None of this was there just over 100 years ago. And look how much we've come to rely on airplanes and how much we take them for granted. I'm going to get on the airplane and, you talk on a cell phone. I'll be in L.A. in a few hours and, this and that. And, I'll be in London tomorrow. And it's not a big deal. But I thought, if the Wright brothers could be here, if I had 24 hours with these guys and say, look what you started. And my thought was, how would I couldn't take them right to a 7.4. They wouldn't know what it is. They think they're inside of a house. So I'd try to find the most beat up piece of garbage airplane I could find and say, don't get too excited, okay? And they'd be very excited. And then if I only had a day, we would be going up through Cherokee 140s, 172s, into little jets and bigger jets. Can you imagine the wonder and the shock that they would be in, and the excitement, and maybe a little horrified, but that's where that song came from. The lyrics are, if you were here for just a day, you wouldn't believe your eyes. All the things that you've started, it's amazing. So that is one of my favorite songs, Kitty Hawk.
Well, let's listen to a short clip from it.
If you were here for just a day, you wouldn't believe your eyes. What we've done with your vision, all the airplanes in the sky. In time it all came together. It was you who led the way. Your eyes would fill with wonder if you were here for just a day. If you were here just a day, we could talk a while. I'd tell you about some of my heroes with courage, strength and style. Amelia, Charles, Christine, just to name a few. Can you believe it possible that we've been walking on the moon? We're a long, long way from Kitty Hawk, where they say it first began. Two brothers' minds created a powered wing to carry man from Kitty Hawk.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your recording studios. I know you've built a couple in the past. You're building a new one at West Virginia, where you live now. How are those going to get used, or how will this one get used?
Well, having a decent place to record for me has always been not just a dream. I got to tell you, Max, I don't have, speaking of dreams, I've never had just dreams. To me, dreams, nothing happens. For some reason, I have dreams and they happen. I think I learned to fly, and then whatever it is. And it's not boastful. I just feel like I've been an extremely blessed man in my life. So with the recording studios from my dad teaching me, early on, I was also always very much interested in the audio aspects, the technical, the recording, mixing, mastering, all of that besides writing and playing music. So Netjets afforded me the opportunity to really build a state-of-the-art dream studio in Colorado. And, I didn't know it at the time. We'd only have that studio for about 13 years. And, I made a life change at that point. But I have all the gear from the studio. I literally built it with one other friend from the ground up, and it was the largest studio between Denver and Las Vegas. I'm sorry. We did a lot of great work there, and that was the best part, being able to help people create the projects that they've always wanted to create. We try to keep it affordable and just do a great job for people. I'm not a bottom line money guy and never have been. I never will be. So that studio closed, and I moved to West Virginia and married love of my life, Allie. And on this mountainside cabin, last year we started preparing digging out the side of a mountain to put in. There's mountains everywhere. That's all there are here. So we started digging out the side of a mountain to build a new recording studio. And it's going to be a little better than a year before it's done, but it'll be full analog and digital. How are we going to use the studio? We will do anything audio, from audio restoration to not so much duplication. I'd say short run duplication. I love helping people. So if someone comes in with, here's an old reel-to-reel of my grandparents getting married in the 50s, can you preserve this for me? Yes, and I love doing that. It's not a big money maker, but you know what? It's something they want, and it feels good for them to have and to pass on for generations. That, for me, is what it's about. I've taught a fair amount in my other studio for younger people that want to become engineers. So I think it's going to be called West Virginia Recording Studio. How original, huh? But I've also recently, the last 6 months, began a new business, and it's a new radio station, and it's also to help people, specifically unknown singer-songwriters. And I remember when I first built my Colorado studio, my good friend that I mentioned early on in this program, Lane Gibson, Lane also has a beautiful studio, and he told me, you will be amazed how much great music, original music, you'll hear by artists that no one else will ever hear. And I never forgot that, and I have found a way that I can help unsigned original songwriters reach the masses. So that's how the studio is going to be used.
That's great. And I was just looking here, and I found it. You had sent me a link to it, songwritersradionetwork.com. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about the concept behind it?
Yes. See, the major labels, they have an artist or artists to promote. And the way they do that is they get a great song, they get a great artist, great musicians, great studio producer, arranger. They put them all together and they come out with a masterpiece, whether it's Vince Gill or Dolly or whoever it is. But they don't stop there. And the next big step, the most important step, is promotion. Well, promotion is really not affordable or tangible for most independent artists for many reasons. Families, jobs, money, and knowing what to do. So I've created this Songwriters Radio Network, and we're inviting original songwriters to come check out the station, check out the website, learn what it's all about. But what we're doing is we're promoting, there is a fee, but it's affordable fee to singer-songwriters around the world. And we're just launching it in February, but we have DJs that are in Croatia, Scotland, Portugal, and one in LA so far. I'm going to be looking for more, probably Japan, Germany, and Australia. But these songs really will be heard around the world. There will be a free app for listeners. There's a lot more to it, but just know that I'm not all about the bottom dollar. I really am about helping people and watching good things happen for people. And this is a way that I can hopefully do my part to be helpful.
Well, speaking of helping people, what kind of advice would you give a younger person who's contemplating a career in aviation or even in music based on your years of experience? What would you encourage people to do?
Well, I'm not going to say that my advice is the best, but I have always lived to follow my heart. Max, when I was 19 years old, I met a man who worked for a very large company. He spent 38 years there. Now, I was 18 or 19 years old when I met him. His name was Jay. And I told Jay, I said, man, 38 years, you must have loved your job. He said, I hated it. And I never forgot that. In my mind, I'm thinking, why would you waste your life working someplace you hate? I didn't know if he was kidding. And I said, why did you work there if you didn't like it? He said, they had a great retirement program. And it floored me. And I'd say I've never had a bad job. I had some jobs that didn't fit me. And it turned out a few times that I went to leave, the same place gave me a job that fit me better. But I can't imagine going to work and not liking it. So my advice is, after all that rambling, follow your heart and do something you like. And it's not that I liked going to work every day, but if this goes on for 4 weeks or 6 or 8 weeks that you're not having a good time at work, and I don't mean goofing off, working hard but enjoying it and feeling that you're part of the group and you're making progress for your boss and for yourself, don't stay. There's a young guy that's my second officer in a citation, and he doesn't know how fortunate he is at 600 hours to be in the right seat of a citation. I would have killed for that, at 1,000 hours or whatever I had. But he's also a flight instructor, and he told me recently he hates it. We talked about it, and I told him, quit. What do you mean, quit? I said, you don't like it? Quit. I'm making money. He said, you don't know how important your job is? The lives you're teaching people, you basically have their life in your hand. If you're not enjoying this and giving it 120%, quit. I hope I made an impact. Either way, either do a better job or to quit. Because young guys out there, if you're instructors or whatever it is, especially around airplanes, if you're not totally into it, you don't belong there because you're going to get hurt or possibly someone else is going to get hurt. So we want better for you than that.
I think that's extremely well said, and it definitely highlights an issue in flight instruction, which there are some people who are there just for the hours and really don't like what they're doing. And I'm sure some of them still do a good job nonetheless, but I'm sure that people aren't always getting the best from them. I can remember having had a job years ago where I used to virtually every day think I hate my job, and wow, what a burden was lifted when I left that job.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about your book, Hiking Along the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, the Geezer's Guide to Hiking Success, the ultimate Geezer's Guide to Hiking Success. At 63 years old, I'm 63, not my wife. Let's be clear about that, guys. But it was during the pandemic, and I wasn't flying at the time. And we wound up walking. We wound up at a park, and the Appalachian Trail in Maryland just happened to go through this park. So we walked on that trail for a little bit, and as we were going back to our cabin that we had rented for a weekend, I said, what would you think about hiking the Appalachian Trail? And she looked at me happily, actually, and said, are you serious? So that was the start of it. And 4.5 months later, neither one of us were long-distance hikers, but 4.5 months later, we took our first steps on the Appalachian Trail. And for those of you who don't know, it covers 14 states from Georgia to Maine, 2,193 miles. Yeah, and they say the altitude changes along the 2,100, almost 2,200 miles is the equivalent to climbing Mount Everest 16 times. It's walking 5 million steps. I went through 6 pairs of shoes. So we spent 9 months together, and it was the greatest thing for us individually and for us as a couple. I think it would either break you or really help to make you. The book, The Ultimate Geezer's Guide to Hiking Success, is really about all the things we learned along the way that we didn't know ahead of time. And we read about 5 books and we looked at a bunch of videos, but there is a lot on the trail that we didn't know. And that's what the book's about. And it's to be helpful. I can honestly say, of course I'm somewhat biased, but I can honestly say if anybody desires to hike the trail, first of all, they should do it. Whether they complete it or not, they should have the experience. But we were successful through hikers, which means we did all of it in one shot within a 12-month period. And there's some things that, that we learned that I just wanted to share. And I've heard back from a few people, and I didn't know them, that my name and address is in the book. They can reach out through an email, and a few have done that and have thanked me for writing the book. And it feels good. I hope it helps people to stay safe and have a great time.
Ken, sounds like you are living a remarkable life and enjoying life and doing lots of different kinds of things. For people who are interested in buying your music, what's the best way for them to buy some of your music?
The best way is probably go to my website where you can view all of it. It's kendravis.com, and Dravis is just like Davis with an R, Dravis, so kendravis.com. And the book's up there, and the CDs are up there, and I think they link you over to Amazon, but that's the best way to easily locate all of them.
Ken, I can't tell you how much fun this has been today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I hope to come back another time, Max.
We'll have you back. And my thanks to Ken for joining us today. As you can tell, we had a great time talking together. Now, if you enjoyed Ken's music, please go on out to kendravis.com where you can purchase some of his music or his book. And then if you've been enjoying Aviation News Talk for a while, start off the new year right and go ahead and sign up to become a member and support the show financially. Show us some of your love. You can do that via Patreon by going out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, or you can make a one-time donation at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And if you just want to drop me a line to tell me anything about your flying or the show, go out to aviationnewstalk.com and click on Contact at the top of the page, and I might read your email on the show, unless, of course, you ask me not to. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up. And remember that you can always go around.
You can